All right, everyone. We're tech checking a few things out here. Just want to make sure we've got some folks in. Can everyone hear me all right? Awesome. All right. John is shaking his head. I see. It's a good it's a good sign. Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Much appreciated. Thanks, Jason. All right. John, I'm gonna go ahead and kick us off here, get started, and walk through our slides, and I'll hand it over to John in just a second. Okay. All right, so we're going to go through and get to our next slide. You are where it's at, Blackbaud Cloud Operations and CRM. For those of you who are fans of Beck, neither John nor I have two turntables and a microphone, but we are where it's at, and there is a little destination a little up the road. So that's what we're going to go through today. I am Brandon Winchester. And I've got John Yeager. John is Senior Director, Software Development. I am Senior Manager, Success Engineering. Want to just kind of briefly say we've both been with Blackbaud for quite a while and collaborating on both of these items about Blackbaud Cloud Operations and how to work with customers and what our best practices mean for customers, both hosted by us and not. As well as all of the many, many awesome and wonderful things that John is going to talk to you about our cloud operations team. But I think this is the first time I've ever had the pleasure of sharing a stage, virtual or otherwise, with John. So I'm pretty honored about that. And with that said, we'll go ahead and kind of briefly talk here about our agenda. So I'm going to do through a couple of quick housekeeping items, just a few kind of quick things. And then I'm going to hand it over to John. He's going to go through cloud operations, what that is, what's new, what it means, and then, quite frankly, why we think that's a pretty appealing, offering that Blackbaud has. After that, I'll shift over to some recommendations and best practices from my side. The kind of thinking here is those are good for the cloud, and as a result, they're good for you. We think they're kind of good all around. And then we'll talk a little bit about migrations and how to kind of think about migrations, what our experiences around migrations, and the like. So with that said, kind of real quick, I do have our safe harbor statement here. And of course, this is our kind of our standard safe harbor statement. Just means that these are forward-looking statements. Some of these things are in production, but some of them are forward-looking statements we're going to make. And what we share today is accurate for sure as of this time, but there's always a potential for things to change a little bit in response to unforeseen events and other things. So, take everything with a little bit of grain of salt. Ultimately, our conversation here is one where we hope we can engage with you afterwards and some other conversations and make sure everything is fully tightened up. So with that said, we got a long way to go and a short time to get there. John, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Brandon. I am here to talk. Oh, no, it looks like animations don't work well on Backstage. Well, that's going to make this presentation very interesting. So we'll see how this works. What is Blackbaud Cloud Operations? Should be the title here. Blackbaud Cloud Operations, you're probably here as an IT professional, know a little bit about what you can do in the cloud or in a private data center. And Blackbaud Cloud Operations is really a lot of virtual hardware inside of Azure, you could argue, right? So I've got a little very, very obviously obfuscated document there showing kind of what we do, some of the SQL instances and web services and other components that make up the product. We're leveraging a number of different Azure resource types to get that done, trying to follow best practices in the Azure space. So by the way, what that means is you could do this, right? Like there's nothing stopping anyone from spinning up CRM in Azure. As a matter of fact, when we talk internally about how you host the product, if someone says, we have a customer and they're in Azure, so that's different. I'm like, they're basically on-prem. They're running their own hardware, right? They're running their hardware differently, but they're running their own hardware. So that's what that looks like. So I think the better question, which you can't see in all my wonderful animations, and again, join me on this wonderful journey of no animations, we'll have fun. I think the real question we need to talk about is why we want to use Blackbaud Cloud Operations. So if I'm saying, hey, you can do this yourself, what is the value add for Blackbaud Cloud Operations? So to answer that, I'm going to have to go to a story about, this is messed up on my slides you can't see in animation stuff around why Blackbaud is using Azure. So part of the conversation about why Blackbaud is using Azure is understanding our data center footprint. And this was 2020, right? So in 2020, we had a wonderful COVID meeting. We all sat very far apart in the building, having a discussion about our cloud strategy. And we talked about all the different data centers Blackbaud owns and all the different pieces and components, right? The thing you can't see that we're on the slide too is, network diagrams that are very complicated that involve one data center, firewall diagrams that are super complicated that involve one data center, conversations about backup solutions and storage components, and do we want to have the highly compressed storage components that saves rack space versus the less compressed and more expensive but more rack space components, and what does that look like, right? And trying to manage all of those components. And then even in spaces where we had some data centers that were more managed for us, those data centers got complicated because you might have one data center where they want to charge you per compute unit that they have decided on what that means, or where if you need somebody to come rack and stack something, you have to go figure out who is the person who has the hands who can actually go touch this thing and what does that look like. So there was a lot that had to happen there to figure out how those different things would work. Looks like our slides disappeared for me. Is that just for me, Brandon, or the universe?
John,
we can make the animations work, maybe.
John, I'm going for an audible. We're gonna go a little crazy. You want automation?
Oh boy.
John? You want automation?
Yeah,
all right, everybody.
I don't know how to click now. Maybe can you click, Brandon?
I am. I'm gonna try.
All right. You can click through this because so these are some of the pictures. By the way, you'll see things on here that there's a lot of stuff, rack diagrams and other things. FYI, there's even conversation. We don't do this. This was a joke. Click again, Brandon, quickly before it looks too bad. There we go. That's a joke. That's not us. Just a joke, right? But there's a lot going on there, and a lot of what you saw there is all a bunch of old stuff. So like we talked about like tape robots. So we've been doing this for forever. We have a lot of experience doing it, right? We had challenges. All right, next slide. Brandon, you get to. Sorry about that. So why are we using Azure? So we're using Azure because of economies of scale, right? Azure is doing things that we can do, but they're doing them differently, more efficiently, more consistently because they have the muscle in some ways to do that work, right? So they have data centers in 60 regions. They have 200 different services, trillions of transactions, storing huge amounts of data, backup data, recovery systems, failover capabilities, billions of dollars of investments in cybersecurity, tons of different compliance offerings. So there's lots of stuff they're doing that we can do a lot of that. We have. We by the way, we did it, right? Like we built this stuff. I mean, not at the scale, right? But we built the stuff and made it happen. But instead of doing that now, we're saying, hey, we as a company, we want to invest in the things we know, right? So if you click on the next slide, sorry again, Brandon, it's gonna be fun. The really what we're talking about. So we closed 6 of our data centers in the last 2 years to move to Azure. We have shut those down, and we are moving to Azure. If you're an international customer, all of our international space is in Azure. By product line, we've been shutting data centers down to move them to Azure. We're doing that because we want to leverage what they have. So next slide. And what does that mean? So why do you want to use Blackbaud Cloud Operations? Really, the question we should be talking about isn't Blackbaud Cloud Operations. It's not Azure. It's not what's there. It's SaaS, right? So something you're probably all used to having a discussion about is what are the different levels of these things you can do, right? So if you're on premise, like we were, we owned everything, right? We owned compute, storage. We owned having to make sure that we had a ROC that covered people having keys to open the network cabinet, right? Like all the things are things we had to own, right? If you move to IaaS and PaaS, that gets a little better, right? There's a lot of stuff you don't have to do anymore. You don't have to manage a floor space. You don't have to worry about power and racks, but you do have to worry about the runtimes, the licensing, some of the security concerns, operating systems, data storage, all of those things, right? Blackbaud Cloud Operations is about SaaS. Blackbaud Cloud Operations for CRM is about getting you out of all of those things and into a world where you're leveraging CRM as a service, not CRM as an infrastructure problem, right? Next slide, please. So what does that mean? That means you are managing your org's business needs. So you're no longer worrying about, do I have enough rack space? Do I have all these different components? Am I meeting my compliance needs? You're focused on your application users. Are they getting the experience they need to have? You're thinking about the reporting needs that are specific to your business, the customizations and the processes that are specific to your business. You're thinking about how your org leverages the application, right? We are the ones actually providing CRM. So we are the ones who we talk to about quality, uptime, compliance, security, logging, monitoring, all of the things that you would have to worry about, whether you are on-prem or in the cloud, are things we are concerned with, and we are doing those. And by the way, we're held accountable, right? There's an SLA you have working with us, and we either deliver on that SLA or there's ramifications to us not delivering on that. So that's on us, right? We own that, and we are there to provide that service for you. And part of what we're providing is the innovation as well, right? So yes, there's lots your organization is probably doing to innovate. Do you want to be the one innovating on how to build CRM as a product, or leverage or innovating on how you build a better integration in order to leverage CRM data to solve the specific needs of your organization, right? We want you focused on that latter thing. We want you focused on what's special to you and not on the things that are standard CRM-isms that everyone needs to handle. Next slide, please, Brandon. So what is Blackbaud Cloud Operations? This is what we said it is. If you click again, really what we're talking about is Blackbaud CRM as a service, right? So what does that mean? So I've said that a couple times, right? I've been repetitive. What do I mean when I say that? There are a lot of things that, again, your organization can do these things too. The same way we were doing things in a private cloud, you can do these things too. They're pretty expensive and they're challenging, and there's a scaling issue here and a conversation. And so how do we want to manage those things as a group, right? That's a lot of things. That's things from even before changes get made in a system. How are we managing the changes? How are we monitoring 24/7? Who's on call when challenges occur? How are we delivering the software consistently across all the different organizations? Security is a huge deal, right? And as you're all aware, many organizations have security challenges. We've obviously grown in our security footprint and our standards as well. And this is something that we take very seriously, and we are working with our partners and internally to address. And then we're always, again, we're innovating in the space of how we deliver CRM, right? So it's not just that we are delivering it. We don't, we're not done. We are continuing to figure out, how do we do a better job? How do we make it more scalable? How do we make it have a better uptime? How do we avoid having any downtime if possible? And part of that also comes from learning from our mistakes. We have problem managers. If there's an incident that occurs, 3 times a week, we have a meeting to talk about what has happened, what we're doing to make sure it doesn't happen again. Can we be proactive? Can we monitor better? Even if it's a third party, we're meeting with them. We have regular meetings with Microsoft, right, to talk through issues we're seeing to make sure we can get those resolved. So there's a lot happening in this space. Click through again, please, Brandon. So to dig in more, what does some of that mean? So like I said, the change board, we have before any change can be made in our system that isn't a standard change, there is a risk and a validation process we go through to make sure the change makes sense, to understand what the impact could be, to understand if changes like this have been done before, to talk about how the change is being made. We are tracking that change to make sure we can comply with all audit needs. And we have industry standard tools and processes for making those changes. So we're leveraging ServiceNow for change tracking. We are leveraging automation in a lot of our environments to make those changes, right? So there's a lot happening there under the covers. We have a 24/7 knock. They can respond whenever. If there is an issue with an environment, my team and myself, we get paged, right? We understand there's something happening. My team knows when they hear the sad trombone sound on my phone because we're on a meeting somewhere, that means something's broken somewhere, because that's that's the ringtone I picked for this. And we jump on a call and we figure out what's going on, right? The NOC can page all the different resources that are needed to solve a problem, including, again, third-party vendors, right? So I have my Microsoft support contact's phone number in my phone, and we text on a regular basis, right? Sometimes even when there's not a problem, because we're just being nice to each other. So we know we are working on things all the time. And they are even watching as changes are being made to make sure there are not issues. We have monitoring specialists leveraging SolarWinds as an industry standard tool, and some of the Microsoft log monitoring as industry standard tools to look at what's happening in the environments. We have alerting that goes off proactively. That's just a warning that tells us, oh, hey, tomorrow morning, go do something about this to make sure there's not a problem, right? It's not just something's broken. It's, hey, you might want to investigate this, right? Or, hey, this trend looks different than what you expect. So there's a lot that goes into that. And that monitoring is not something where we flipped a button and turned on out-of-box stuff. We have learned and grown. Next slide. So DevSecOps. So like I said, we have a DevSecOps organization helping to build the environment and manage the environment. So our environments are created and maintained leveraging code. We do not, when you say, hey, when we have a new CRM customer come on board, we don't say, let's go allocate some servers and figure this out. We have an internal tool we built called IOM, Infrastructure Operations Manager. And we go into that tool and we push a button, and a bunch of code runs behind the scenes to grab an address space, spin up a VNet, spin the machines out, build in the version of CRM you picked, and all these other things that we do. That means that when we do that, we feel confident we're going to deliver a CRM environment meeting all of our security standards, all of our monitoring standards, and working and running for you every time. That also means we're delivering a self-service portal to you as well. So when you're actually leveraging the CRM self-service portal, which hopefully those in BCO can attest to, that portal actually just calls into IOM behind the scenes, right? So we're giving you all and the customers in this environment a window into those services, be able to push buttons and run that same automation in a managed fashion. So you can be more responsive to your own needs, right? Upgrading environments or making sure that the staging environment gets refreshed for production. Like those are things you can take on your own, leveraging the same automation we're leveraging. Like I said, we make proactive changes. So we have monitoring that happens that is an email and a list to us. And then we just come in and say, oh, cool, we're going to go handle that today. This person's disk has got to 70% full. Therefore, we need to increase the disk size, right? And we will do that quietly behind the scenes. There, a lot of the alerts, a lot of the times that I hear the sad trombone, customers don't even know and aren't impacted, right? But something has gone wrong in the background, and we are making sure that it doesn't impact customers. And on top of that, our security team, again, is on call 24/7, looking at security logging. We have an extensive suite of security tools we're leveraging to provide security in the environment, which includes penetration testing from internal tools, third-party testing, external assessors coming in and looking at our security configurations just to make sure that they feel like we're making progress. We work with Cisco, we work with CrowdStrike and others to make sure we're delivering the best we can. And we even have an internal red team. So we have a team whose only job is to try to infiltrate the non-production versions of our environments, because that would be bad otherwise, internally, just to come say, hey, here's how we found some weaknesses, and then we go track those down and fix them. So there's a ton happening in this space. I will also mention that one of the good things here, when I say DevSecOps, that means development teams, security teams, and the operations teams, which means if there is a problem or a bug, and it's a CRM bug, we get the developers who built CRM on the phone to come help fix the problem, right? We can then figure out what's the best way to go solve this. And actually, our operations team, who has built a lot of this environment in Azure, is made up of people who have run CRM for many years in our co-located environments, and who also people who have actually helped build CRM and CRM functionality are on the operations team, front line, right? Ready to go, ready to answer questions. And I can prove it if you click again, Brandon, because I was like, man, what is the most impactful thing I can do there one more time, which is to prove it. Hey, even this guy wrote some CRM code, right? So I was trying to think of the most impactful thing I did in CRM, and I was like, it's probably this one field on the constituent table. If you know what that is, we can talk about it. But I was on vacation when someone called me about adding this. So we had to have a long conversation about it. So we all on this team have a lot of experience in this platform and are every day working to make it better. You can click one more time, Brandon. And to that point, we have continual improvement we are doing on a constant basis to make sure we're achieving our goals. So what does that mean? We have a compliance team, right? If you all don't know, there's a lot going on in the compliance world to make sure we are meeting a lot of standards. If you go into Azure, there's things they will supply to help. Y'all hear me? Sorry, I think I'm breaking up. All right. So we have a lot of things going on there to make sure that changes are working, that they're being tracked, that we understand what's happening. We are handling all of that for you. We're handling access logs and audit conversations. All of those are being handled as part of compliance. We have capacity managers who, like I said, are actively looking at, hey, what are we leveraging today in Azure? What are we going to need tomorrow? Let's make sure we're getting those things spun up before we have actual needs that happen. So we have a team that's work is just figuring that out. And we have a problem management team whose job is to say, okay, we had an issue. What are we doing about it? How does that, the changes are we going to make? When we see this kind of change come up again, what are we doing differently this time? Are we adding additional monitoring? Are we being proactive? And those meetings are meetings across a team where we sit down and talk through, even teams that weren't involved, nothing to do with CRM in Azure, right? Are still part of those meetings and providing feedback. Hey, we saw this kind of problem before. Here's what we did, right? So there's a lot of cross collaboration happening. The engineering teams are engaged. The security teams are engaged. We're going back and forth to figure out not how do we solve this one problem, but can we solve a class of problems? Can we make this go away for, our ENXT customers, right? Who might also be impacted by something from CRM, right? We're helping them. So there's a lot of cross collaboration across the groups. This is very important because these kind of things aren't static. So if you click one more time, Brandon. For those of you who are not aware, I think I might be getting lag again. Things like this happen, right? So for those of you who are not aware, PCI 4.0, it's a real thing, right? We've gone from years of other versions of this to PCI 4.0, and it is a big change in the PCI standard, right? If you're an organization that has to handle that change yourself, it is massive. Trust me. As an organization is going through it today, it is a massive change to the way they're looking at PCI. And so we're doing that for you, right? We're handling that. We're making sure we are meeting those standards. We're making sure your environment meets those standards and making sure that we are ready for PCI 4.1 or whatever the next version is, right? Or the next version of SOC or HIPAA. We're jumping on top of those things. We are getting ready for them ahead of time and making sure that you are staying in compliance. One more slide, I think, is all I got left, Brandon. Oh, two more, I lied. So just to give an idea, I kind of took this from some of our customer success partners here. I think it's really easy for me to say all the words I said, and then it's like, yeah, that's great, but like some of these things I have, or yeah, I can do that, right? This is not a comprehensive list, but it's a pretty big list of all the stuff that, sure, if you want to run it yourself, you can. Are you thinking about this list of things, right? Versus if you're purchasing Blackbaud Cloud Operations, really, we're just doing that for you, right? Again, it's a service, right? You're not worrying about these things. That stuff just happens in the background, right? Those tools, those processes, those audits, those compliance, all of that is just happening behind the scenes, and it's not on your plate anymore. All right. I think that is my last slide. Here we go. So yes, so now part of what I talked about here in the cloud operations is I said this lets you focus on what makes your team special. So you're going from I need to run CRM as a thing to I'm focusing on my operations as an organization. And I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Winchester to talk about that.
Thanks a lot, John. Absolutely spectacular stuff as always. John, I did not know that the sad trombone meant that. I will keep an ear out for that the next time I'm in the office or in a meeting with you, and do my best to head in the opposite direction. So like John was saying, let's talk a little bit now and shift to what makes your organization a little bit special. So we're at BB Dev Days, and really we should be looking at this through the lens as developers, right? And what in a particular given environment with software as a service, how do we as developers kind of work and make that environment one that we can get the most out of? And the first thing that's really important to understand is that as a community of developers, we want the same things that you do. Now that's an obvious statement because Blackbaud wants our customers to be successful. So the specific context I'm talking about here is as a community of developers. And as a community of developers, we all want the same thing in that we want more frequent and easier upgrades. We want a better ROI. We want a better ROI for you, our customers. We as a vendor want our own better ROIs. We want more robust environments. We want scalability. We want security. We want trouble-free interaction with the environment. We want things like our technology stack to be easy to work with. We want all of those things ourselves, and we want all those things for you. And so when we talk about this idea of us providing CRM as a service, and you as a customer managing your org's business needs, we want to make all that process sort of easier together. And the intersection of that as developers is what we call our recommendations, our developer recommendations. And we're going to talk about that, and it's definitely in the context of our hosted environment of cloud operations. But I think the really cool thing about this is our recommendations work, and our recommendations are useful whether you are hosted by us, whether you're hosted by someone else, or whether you host yourself. The idea here is that at some point, every single one of our customers is going to have and go through service pack upgrades, technology stack upgrades like SQL Server, the Windows platform. They're going to have to move to a new server, all of those things. And we want all of that to be smooth so we can get the better ROI, the best ROI, the most secure instances, have robustness, have reliability, all of those things. So we're gonna sprinkle down a little sprinkle of best practices. My daughter came in earlier and she said, "Wow, that person sprinkling the salt looks like super hipster cool. Is that going to fit in with a developer conference?" And I said, "Of course, right? Who's cooler than our best practice developers?" So again, a little bit more about the why here. Let's dive into that in a little bit more of a granular way. And I think a very important thing that John said is worth going back to, and that's we've been doing this at scale, and we've been doing this for a long time at scale. We do it constantly with our automation practices, test environments, dev environments, production environments, all of those things. The 29 minutes while we've been doing this, who knows how many environments have been spun up successfully, correctly, quickly via automation since we've been talking about this. Benefit from our experience and learn from our mistakes. We have made mistakes, we've learned from them, and we review those processes and we build in ways to negate or compensate for those as we go along. So learn from us when we talk about our recommendations for developer practices. I also want to note, and John, I won't point out that was from 2009 with your name on it, although that's incredibly impressive. We use the same SDK that you do, right? We are consumers of that SDK. Now, again, we use it a little bit differently. We use it at scale. We use it for a long time. We use all those things, but we use that SDK the same way that you do. My team uses it. Our teams across Blackbaud use it. We all use that SDK, and we follow the same recommendations that we make. When we talk about these things, again, it comes from practices that we've done in the past, sometimes from mistakes, sometimes from things that have worked successfully, and we follow our own recommendations. And then the sort of final thing here that I think worth kind of circling back to is we're in a world now where we want to start talking about a real, true software as a service mentality. We want to start understanding things as developers in the software as a service world. All right, so everything that we're going to think about in terms of developers, it starts with the foundation of the Infinity SDK. That is our bedrock of all of our recommendations. Use the SDK. Use the SDK the way that it was intended, the way that we have put it together. the Infinity SDK is an incredibly powerful tool. It's an incredibly powerful tool that allows for a massive amount of customization and work. Again, we use that same SDK. Use the Infinity SDK. As a general rule, if you've built something using the SDK, lifting and shifting to new technology, new platforms, new environments is, generally speaking, an easy process. Not 100% all the time, but as a general rule of thumb, if you use the SDK or an SDK-friendly method, you'll probably have a lot of ease in the future when we talk about those things like adoption of new features, scalability, smoother and faster upgrades, etc. Now, the Infinity SDK by itself is massive, and we could do, I think we have done entire dev day sessions on just the Infinity SDK. But there's two sort of areas I want to kind of note here, and this will be in the slide deck as it goes out eventually. One is our SDK landing page. If you're curious, I put the URL down the bottom just so if you want to like screen capture or kind of get it real quick. I'll see if I can dunk it into the chat here if we have some time, if I can multi-thread. What's critical about that isn't just using and accessing the Infinity SDK, but also knowing that we actually put out something called the 7 Commandments of Infinity development. If you haven't seen it before, it's still valid. It's still 100% true. Some of the icons and the pictures may actually predate 2009. They might not look a little dated, but the concepts are still absolutely 100% valid today, and they are the bedrock for ease as a Blackbaud developer. Second thing that we want to talk about with SDK is we want to talk about the right solution for the problem. So in the CRM and Infinity world, there are tons of different ways you can do various things. Sometimes you could be spoiled for choice, if you will. We will always want to advocate for the right solution for the problem, but an API forward and REST first approach if possible. So if you have a lot of choices and one of them is the API, our recommendation is usually, if there's no reason not to, that's probably the right path to take. And within the API, if the REST API will do it, that's probably the right path to take. So again, we always want to advocate for the right solution, but API forward, REST first approach if possible. And then finally, don't mess with out of the box. And that can mean a lot, right? But you, generally speaking, if you find yourself changing or altering something that already exists that's not custom or unique to your organization, that's probably something that's going to come back and bite you in the end. Like John talked about, there's an enormous amount of automation across the board in our world, an enormous amount of automation in how we work on things, and nothing will take automation to an absolute screaming halt than an alteration that it's not expecting. And if it turns out that something that out of the box has been changed, we can't always alter the code. It might have to be a refinement or a change in that custom task that needs to be fixed, not the automation. So general rule, don't want to be messing with the out of the box. So my little automation here, all right, that's our Infinity SDK branding page. Nice Sky UX theme, looks really sharp. And then here's our 7 commandments of Infinity development. Don't reuse, search, reference the data form, instance ID, don't touch product development, tables or specs, prefix, unique names, and then use package spec. Again, all of these are listed in depth with explanations out on that site. You should definitely take a look at that. So let's shift a little bit just away from the very specific Blackbaud stuff as developer recommendations. And let's talk about some general developer recommendations. So we talked about software as a service. There are entire books written on general SaaS best practices. Again, we can't cover all of those here, but 2 of the ones that come up probably the most frequently when talking with our customers is limit direct access to those servers to your developers. And that sounds surprising, but that is the world that we work in. We do not have direct access to those servers. If I go to John and say, hey, John, we got a problem going on, something's kind of funky, I need to get direct access to that server, he's going to say, no, I can't do that. We have to meet all of our compliance and security standards. And then as a developer, it makes things more challenging. And so you have to think ahead a little bit to get in place for those kinds of scenarios. There are ways that We can request various logs to know how to kind of work in that world and sort of rethread your head a little bit, but it makes for a much more compliant scenario, and it forces us as developers to do things via code. John mentioned that we don't actually go and set the server up, we go and rerun it through code. So if we find fixes or alterations, it forces us to go through a very prescribed process that is repeatable down the line. So limit that direct access to your servers. And then, of course, abstract environment out of your design. If you're in a scenario and you're thinking to yourself, okay, I'm on a server 2019 and I'm going to go and do this API call, and on server 2019 that works great. Well, that's probably not a really good scenario that's going to live past server 19. So you really want to make sure you're abstracting out the environment as much as possible so that your code and your solutions can be lifted and shifted to new ones as they're needed. Related to that, we want to upgrade components often and watch those dependencies. If there are third-party dependencies, they need to be updated, they need to be watched, they need to be scanned. And remember, Blackbaud CRM is a component. So if you're in our world, you're in your world, you're in some third-party world, you want to keep those things upgraded and on a regular basis. Keep those dependencies watched, make sure CRM is upgraded on a regular basis, adopt all of those new components as frequently as you can tolerate. Finally, we're going to go ahead and build security and performance into the solution. One of the developers on my team is infamous for saying, if you write something and then you, at the end of it, go and try to make it fast, you're going to fail. Like, you have to build performance in from the very beginning. Security is the same way. You can't add security at the end. It doesn't always work really well like that. Sometimes it's harder. Build security and performance into your solutions from the very beginning, not afterwards. That becomes very, very difficult to kind of move those dependencies and pick and shift those around. Upgrading frameworks becomes really hard because you may be in the middle of a process. You want to build security and performance into the solution from the beginning, and look at security and performance testing as part of all of your upgrades. Some of those framework changes can cause unintended behavior. They might be older, they might have vulnerabilities. You want to watch for those. And of course, right, list out your unique solutions. You want to know what your MVP is for testing. What is the testing that's required for that? Don't mess with out of the box. And, of course, overall, industry best practices are always on the list. Those are practices, we adhere to them, we pay attention to those, and we feel like it's great, and that is a viable scenario for all of the customers that are in our environment, and it'll work for you as well and make for a smoother experience on your side as well. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about migrating and what it might look like to migrate into our cloud environment. I'm going to hand it over to John for the next 2 slides.
Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about this and what we've done here. So we are working on moving more and more customers into the cloud. We've done this multiple times. And one of the things that Brandon and I were talking about was we moved a lot of customers out of our private cloud into public cloud. And that might seem like, oh, that's a different story, right? A lot of things, one of the challenges we've had in some of our data center work is over time, we make changes and modifications and we're not being code driven, we're not being consistent, right? And things get out of whack. And so actually it was a lot like we had to work with the customers and understand, okay, what did we do special for you? How did that work? What did that look like? How do we translate that over to something where we're not doing a lot of special work? We're doing that on purpose because that means that some of the things that would break for customers were the things that didn't follow the process, right? That's the first thing it's going to break. If you don't follow the process, you're not using the SDK like Brandon's saying, you're doing something special. If we make a standard change to the product or a security change to the environment to meet a standard, we're not going to support that. It's going to break. So we want to set you up for durable stuff you can use. So we're working on this. We have a plan. We have migration processes. We know how to coordinate and work with you on this. You want to click through, Brandon? And so what we've done in those scenarios, you can keep a local site running. We'll get your environment up and running in Azure. If you are following the recommendations that Brandon has laid out, this will likely take almost no time. So we definitely had customers coming from private to public cloud where if you're following all the standards and best practices, it took days, right, to get their environments completely up and running, tested and ready to go. And so we can then spin it up, get it ready for you, get you running, you sign off on what that looks like, and then we're able to quickly roll over to production. Because like I said, it's just we're clicking a button for a production site and spinning up your database again. There's really not much to it from our side. And so the biggest challenge is really going to be, if you have those customizations, what testing do we need to do? How do we get those to be more standard? And so if you're ready for that, it's a better story. Back to you, Brandon.
All right, thanks, John. So if you're curious about a migration, we have an entire professional services led engagement with a very tailored project plan. We've got a beginning template that's always constantly evolving as we deal with different customers. Every customer, the stripes are different on every different zebra. They're always a little unique, always a little different. We're constantly learning and tweaking our existing process to be more comprehensive, grow depending on the specifics of each customer. Some of the considerations: change management, that's kind of an obvious one. Customization, refinement. It's entirely possible that you've got solutions that might need some minor tweaking to come into our environment, or just tweaking in general. That isn't terribly unusual. Just kind of depends on those customizations. Like John said, there are some that lift and shift very easily, others that need a little bit more refinement and changes around them. MVP testing, John mentioned that's another kind of critical one. Upgrades, you may be coming from an environment where you're on an older version of CRM, an older version of SQL Server. Moving into our world, it's going to be the shiniest and most interesting one. So that has components that occasionally need to be built into what that consideration is. What those might bring, new features that you can utilize, which are frequently pretty cool. And just general adoption of new features. Might be the tech stack, might just be the version of CRM. This is also a good chance, I'm going to always plug this, a chance to do an evaluation of your solutions. If you're moving environments, if there's one solution or task you've got where you go, oh, geez, I can't believe we have to move that, might be a good chance to get rid of it, right? Why is it still around? Can it be recreated or refined to be easier to lift and shift? Are there ways of changing it out? It's a good chance to kind of do a lean evaluation, kind of clean out the garage before you move. Always a good chance to at least kind of keep that in the back of your head. If you're curious about everything we've talked about with the Blackbaud Cloud Operations, we think it's an incredibly compelling story. We're very, very, very proud of what we've developed and where we're going. If you're curious, reach out to your account executive for more information. We can pull the team together to do a discovery conversation. We've got a huge amount of tools that can come in and do an ROI on moving into our environment or staying on premise, and comparing the two and seeing how we really bring a lot of value to that. So we haven't left too much time left, but are there any questions that we can try to get to? Mike, that's pretty funny about the wiring in your data center. That looked like the wiring at my house, but I accidentally spilled coffee on it and everything's broken.
Yeah, that was not us, I swear. I swear I did not pull that off an internal website. The only pictures I had from our data centers now were empty racks where we were closing data centers. We've been celebrating as we go on with, like, here's the empty cage, right? Is there a broom in the corner? That's great.
Nothing more satisfying than closing.
For sure.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Glad you're happy, Mike. A very complicated scenario. Very, very cool to see you getting a lot of value out of Azure.
All right. Totally. I think we have a couple seconds left. So thank you, everyone, for attending.
Yep. Thank you, everyone.
Appreciate the time.
Bye.